Tashi. Welcome to the Heart Essence of Tibetan Buddhism, class number 23 from the Awam Tibetan Buddhist Institute. So, Tashi, welcome back. Let us begin by taking a deep breath, or two or three, in breath slowly, and out. Again. And out. One more. Calming our mind, our body into profound peace. So then we recite a refuge prayer. I take refuge in the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha most excellent for the benefit of all sentient beings. I take refuge in the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha most excellent for the benefit of all sentient beings. I take refuge in the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha most excellent for the benefit of all sentient beings. So today we will finish chapter 16, the third training of the path of Tantra, the wisdom chapter, and begin part 6, the introduction to the path of great perfection, or great completion, or Dzogchen. And chapter 17, the first training on the path of great perfection, the ethics part. But first, we go back to chapter 16, the third training on the path of Tantra, wisdom, and the Rangtong Prasangika, the Madhyamaka approach here. Unlike the Sotantrikas, chapter 10, the Prasangikas refute self-nature and independent existence without trying to establish the true nature by reasoning at all. Now, as we're going to see, there were two different versions of this. That was one of them. That is, the Prasangikas simply argue that the self-nature cannot be established, period. The relative is simply accepted as a perceptual reality, what we call empirical reality, having no true basis. They argue that the attempt to establish emptiness through reasoning is a subtle attempt to grasp the ultimate nature with a conceptual mind. They posit that nothing is either positive or negative, that is, it's transcendent. Whereas the Shravakas and Chiramatras, back in chapter 7, believed that one moment gave rise to the next, Chandrakirti argued that no connection exists between one moment and the next. Otherwise, darkness could be the cause of light, or light could be the cause of darkness. But things do arise. For the Prasangikas, the arising of things was a mere relative appearance, dependent upon consciousness. Thus, beyond that, there is nothing permanent in the absolute. The Prasangikas, who do follow this approach, hold views concerning the nature of relative phenomena. They use reasoning to establish that relative phenomena exist conventionally, not just on their own. Other Prasangikas doubt whether this can be considered to be Prasangika at all. The original Prasangika view refutes all views without asserting any counter-argument to establish a view of their own. Kind of an interesting way to approach all of this. It is completely non-conceptual. You simply rest in emptiness, the absolute freedom from all concepts. Yet, there are vast numbers of books and other texts asserting these non-concepts, if you will. The Prasangika view of the dream example is that there is no concept of real or unreal in a dream. There is no concept of self-nature or absence of self-nature either. Thus, mind rests in total peace. In practice, this direct approach can be challenging. Thus, it is recommended to use the Sotantrika approach to establish emptiness first, then use the Prasangika to cut through the conceptual mind completely. Relative and ultimate truths are mere concepts. Ignorance cannot exist in an awareness without concepts. Early texts differentiated between the way things appear, relative, and the way things are, ultimate. Mipham Rinpoche adds to that the term reflexive awareness, a middle ground, like a term that I sometimes use of relative ultimate, providing a way to talk about the ineffable. We will examine this in more detail in chapter 19. As a practice for now, we're going to look at the Rengtong Prasangika Madhyamaka as a practice. So we have our traditional parts, the daily practice, intention for self and others, as well as a brief nundro, then repeat the purification breaths as before. And so the actual practice then, the Rengtong Prasangika Madhyamaka, says to settle into stillness of body, speech, and mind, very universal. Think about the nature of emptiness as beyond thoughts or labels of any kind. Yet it exists. Self and all phenomena also appear, but are empty of their nature. That is empty of self-existence, i.e. independence, and neither permanent nor impermanent. It transcends both. Then simply let the mind rest naturally in the vast, spacious emptiness of Mahamudra, or great perfection. Conclude by resting naturally in your confidence without thoughts. Just let go and let be. Sit in stillness as long as you can. And then the practice has a dedication and post-meditation as well. Dedication with the mind of liberation, bodhicitta, I dedicate the merit from this practice for the liberation of all sentient beings 3 times. And then post-meditation, between sessions, let whatever arises subdue on its own, like waves becoming still by themselves. Even with strong passions and sufferings, as well as when you are happy, let your mind rest naturally. The next part of this is a discussion of bliss emptiness. In the path of individual liberation, we learned that the appearance emptiness of self and other, that is, to see all phenomena as illusory, that does not truly exist the way that it happens. All phenomena have no independent existence. They are not partless, and they are not permanent. The path of altruism says that we directly experience the luminous emptiness of Nagarjuna's tetralemma. Emptiness is not a thing, it is not no thing, it is not both, and it is not neither. This great paradox provides clarity through that direct experience beyond concepts and labels. Here, the path of Tantra, we experience the transcendence of sensory desires into transcendent bliss emptiness. Rather than discarding afflictive emotions, we embrace them through tantric transformation into wisdom. Physical bliss begins with bliss intermingled with emotions, and then bliss free from emotions, permeating the entire body until every type of touch feels utterly blissful. Mental bliss is the complete absence of mental uneasiness and includes countless different types of delight and pleasure. Bliss will be experienced as insight that pleasure is insubstantial and there is an absence of hankering after its taste. So the more that we get tied up in that kind of thing, the more of a problem that becomes. And so things like desire, grasping, and clinging, the Buddha definitely was opposed to. This is the bliss of innate happiness. So now we move on to the opening of our next topic, which is the Great Perfection, or Dzogchen. So this part is just a brief introduction to that, a little background information heading into it. The path of great perfection, or great completion, or Dzogchen, is the highest level of practice in Tibetan Buddhism. Now that's one particular view. There are other alternatives to that, but it's particularly true within the Nyingma tradition, but not so much in the other branches. So where it is often included as part of the path of Tantra, however, here I have described it as a separate path, as the practices are generally quite different than Tantra. The root texts, however, are often labeled as Tantras nevertheless. The path of great perfection is also known as the path of self-liberation. So far, I have described the paths of individual liberation, altruism, and Tantra. The path of great perfection is that of self-liberation. You are viewed as already being a Buddha. There is no need to transform yourself as the other lineages assert. There is no impure body, speech, and mind, as they are already pure by virtue of you being a Buddha. The task is to realize that we are already a Buddha, a fact that is obscured by our fundamental ignorance of the nature of mind and its many manifestations. As these obscurations are allowed to self-liberate, we come to recognize the state of great perfection that is not other than our pure natural state as it is. Okay, we'll find some issues with that as we work through this a little bit today. The next topic in the text is three different branches: the Simdi, Longde, and Menagde. So no one knows for sure when or where the Great Perfection, or Dzogchen, or Ati Yoga teachings originated. There is even a small bit of archaeological evidence that it may have preceded the historical Buddha, but it's not very convincing. There are also similarities with other systems of practice and philosophy, such as Chan and Taoism in China, Zen in Japan, Shamatha without signs, dhyanas, formless absorptions, Mahamudra, Prajnaparamita, and so forth. So this appears to be related at a very high level of several of these concepts. Within Tibetan Buddhism, the path of great perfection is said to have originated from the primordial Buddha, Amitabhadra, right here above my shoulder. Although the exact lineage varies among different sources, he passed it on to directly, or through Vajrasattva in some stories, to the first human recipient of the teachings, Gyaltsen Dorje, in the 1st century CE. Gyaltsen Dorje then passed it on to Manjushri Mitra in the 2nd century, who passed it on to Sri Simha in the 3rd century, who then passed it on to Padmasambhava, Vimalamitra, and Vairochana, all late 8th century. Obviously, there's some time gaps here. Manjushri Mitra is said to have divided the teachings into 3 classes or series, which we'll come back to in a moment. The mind class, or Simdi, the space class, or Longde, were transmitted by Vairochana. The secret or special instruction class, the Menagde, was transmitted by Padmasambhava and Vimalamitra. Padmasambhava's instructions became known as Khandro Nyingtik. Vimalamitra's instructions became known as Vima Nyingtik. These two were later documented and commented on by Longchenpa, or simply Longchenpa, 14th century, as Khandro Nyingtik and Lama Yangtik, respectively. So we have copies right here in the center, over in the corner here. We have the actual texts associated with each of these, all those titles. Unfortunately, they're not translated into English, so that makes it a little bit more difficult for us. But we do have the texts. So these text then were combined together, unified in his own, this is Longchenpa's commentary as Nyingtik Yabshi. A somewhat condensed version was later created by Jigmed Lingpa in the 1700s after visions of Longchenpa that he received in a retreat, which he wrote down as Nyingtik, probably the best known and most used version of these teachings. Yeshe Lama is the core text from this, and that became the Bible, if you will, of Dzogchen practices. The mind class teachings address the nature of mind in a way that is not all that different from that found in the path of altruism, particularly the middle way teachings of Nagarjuna as well as the path of Tantra. The space class teachings focus on the direct experience of emptiness as being like space, vast and open, without center or boundaries. These special instruction teachings are divided into two parts known as Trekcho and Togao. These two are the main teachings given today, along with a series of preliminary practices. Those preliminary practices are called Korde Rushan, and we'll look at them, but only lightly. The preliminary practices associated with this great perfection are directed at the separation of samsara from nirvana. Basically, the idea is for the practitioner to develop a direct experiential understanding of these differences between these two concepts, and then transcend even those. These practices are not included in the six Bardo teachings of Padmasambhava, but they are included in the Khandro Nyingtik according to Longchenpa. In many cases, these are not taught at all, so I will give only a summary of these, and you may explore them in practices in detail of your own if you choose to do that. In Trekcho views the nature of mind as rigpa, or pure awareness. That is the sensory perception that arises before becoming aware of anything. So when sensory items, say photons, come up to our eyeballs, those come in, I haven't seen them yet. They come into my eye, and then they go into my brain, and they go to particular places where, bingo, I get the perception. So it's saying here that in terms of rigpa, or pure awareness, the sensory perception that arises before becoming aware of anything. So it's talking about that gap before it gets there. It is the root of awareness or consciousness itself. It's the source from where it comes. Thus, it is that which allows awareness of things described as the manifestations of our mind to happen. The goal of Trekcho is the direct realization of Dharmakaya, the absolute or truth body, Buddha nature, clear light, rigpa, etc. Togao, so that's just a short description of the Trekcho. So now the Togao, another short description here, includes several practices, but it is most noted for the 4 visions of Togao, a progressive series of visions increasing complexity and detail, primarily during the practice called sky gazing, that involves looking at a clear, cloudless sky up above and around, in which the visions appear without any external source from which to generate them, resembling a dream in a way. The goal of Togao is attainment of a rainbow body, the manifestation of Sambhogakaya, the Buddha forms of Tantra and relative absolute. So that's a brief summary and introduction to Dzogchen. So now let's get started here. Chapter 17, the first part of this chapter, the first training of the path of great perfection, ethics. As we have been doing, ethics, meditation, and then wisdom. We need to briefly note that the highest principles of wholesome behavior transcend even those I have described before. In transcendent wisdom, as in the Heart Sutra, there is no right or wrong, no good or bad, no attachment or aversion. Here, you transcend even the concept of good or bad. So we don't even say something's good or bad from a Dzogchen perspective, ultimately at least. And I am reminded of the statement of William Shakespeare's Hamlet. You may trigger this in you as well. There is nothing good or bad, but thinking makes it so. Okay? So it's a process that goes through our mind. We decide what is good or bad. Now, there may be consequences or effects that we experience as a result of that. If something's painful, we're more likely to consider it to be bad. If it's delightful, we're more likely to consider it to be good, and so forth. Nagarjuna explained this in terms of the tetralemma based on the teachings of the Buddha. First, transcendent wisdom is not a thing. Okay? It's beyond that. It is not no thing or nothing. Okay, that kind of covers everything. But number 3, it is not both. And then number 4, finally, it is not even neither of those. So think about it. He has eliminated every conceivable possibility save one. It is beyond logic, beyond thought, transcendent. It simply is. Thus, we often use the word suchness or tatata to refer to this blank, nothing. That is truly ineffable, beyond description. That makes my job a little difficult, but many others have nevertheless taught or wrote about these as well. So I will too. This does not mean that you are free to simply do as you choose, independent of the effects on others, however. We must always keep in mind the 4 reliances from chapter 3. We are all interrelated, interconnected, and interdependent. The principles described earlier still apply. These, Padmasambhava said, my view is vast as sky, my behavior as fine as barley flour. Okay? Again, my view is vast as sky or space. My behavior is as fine as barley flour. So this asserts that the difference between ultimate and relative truths, between without attachment and aversion, is the view of Dharmakaya, while behaving in a manner of other vows for the benefit of sentient beings is the Rupakaya, Nimanakaya combined with Sambhogakaya. These are not either or, but both and, one taste. The ethical view of the path of great perfection can be a very slippery slope. In Tibet, crazy wisdom on the part of realized yogis appears to have been culturally accepted. So on one hand, there are no rules, no good, no bad. Any practice that can be done from pure view is an authentic practice in this context, including freely enjoying sense pleasures, being free from accepting and rejecting, engaging in sexual union, and so forth. This principle is very controversial, even in Tibet. There's a set of instructions from Longchenpa in the 1300s that I wanted to share here with you regarding this. called the cloud of banks of nectar, or the cloud banks of nectar. That illustrate the transcendent view quite well, though they may require some explanation for beginners or others not familiar with the idea of a transcendent view. Hopefully you understand that at this point. So this has a few verses, and each begins with the expression emaho. So emaho, the intention of Great Mother Dharmakaya, which is reference to Samittabhadri, the heart of the 10 perfections, which is an elaboration of the 6 perfections, so 6 to 10, is enjoyment of profound wisdom. By genuinely ending up here, there's no one to see appearances. All arising is Dharmakaya's play, manifestations or dynamic radiant display. Illusions are the Lama's compassion. So go ahead and stir things up. Emaho, second verse. The intention of Lama Kunsang. So this is Samittabhadra. So the masculine view. The heart of Yidam Yoga's result is non-fabrication in whatever arises, that is transcendent. By genuinely ending up here, there's no one to be afraid of thought. Whatever happens is mental projection. Thoughts are the Lama's compassion. So go ahead, stir things up. Emaho, third one. The intention of Lama Pema, which is Padmasambhava. The heart of all-embracing Ati, which is Dzogchen, is enjoyment of your stainless mind, pure, not diluted. By genuinely ending up here, there is no one to perceive impurity. Stains are all dharmata's play, some kind of a manifestation or a play of suchness or emptiness, nature of reality, nature of mind, and so forth. All ways of seeing are the Lama's compassion. So go ahead and stir things up. Last one, Emaho, the practice of the woman Tsogyal, Yeshe Tsogyal, who's said to be the consort of Padmasambhava. The heart of secret mantra is the single taste of joy and sorrow, non-dual. Since genuinely ending up here, there is no one to parse or divide what's good and what's bad. They both just enhance experience, that is, without judging, and the source of all ignorance. Whatever appears is the Lama's compassion, not just a total void. There is compassion, that's not a void. So go ahead and stir things up. Emaho. So this short text points out how these practices result in transcending a sense of self, as well as the concepts normally brought on as a result, which, of course, lead to our discontent. On the other hand, with transcendent wisdom, we are no longer bound by those concepts, so we are free to stir things up, as they will no longer result in suffering. Of course, as pointed out below, we must be aware of this very slippery slope, of assuming that we can rationalize any behavior that we choose, even though it may be harmful to others. So that's a problem. We have to address that. That is not the intention, however. Nevertheless, the ideas expressed here can be very liberating for those who truly understand. So think about the quote earlier from Padmasambhava. My view is vast as space, but my actions are as fine as barley flour. That differentiates between the ultimate and the relative. So that's an important concept to be aware of. Not everybody in Dzogchen in particular uses that, but a lot of the great masters actually do, and that's the way that we approach this. In addition, Padmasambhava gave instructions to his consort, Yeshe Tsogyal, that are also helpful in a more complete understanding of this view. So he begins, your realization of the view's nature may be like an ocean, vast, but but still guard the relative cause and effect down to the finest detail. You may understand the vast ocean of Dharmata's nature, but still keep an undistracted training like a pillar of gold. So he's doing the same as in that talk, that there's both of those elements in there. Then you may have realized the natural state of open mind, no boundaries, but still protect your samayas and precepts, stable and undamaged. So you have the big view, but you also follow the precepts. You may have gained realization of the ocean-like Dharmata's nature of mind, but still respect sublime masters as you would the crown of your head. Again, both of those parts. Your loving heart may be free of partiality, but still fulfill the wishes of your companions and all your Dharma friends. You may have seen the equal nature of the Buddhas and all beings, but still avoid, like poison, the 10 unwholesome deeds and their results. Next, you may have realized that the Buddha is your mind, but still regard the sublime yidam that as dear as your own heart and mind. You may have understood that suffering itself is greatest bliss, but still avoid creating all its causes, actions, and involvements. And finally, you may have transformed emotions into pristine wakefulness, but still avoid scorching your mind with flames of the 3 and 5-fold poisons. You may have experienced non-action as the state of greatest ease, but still exert yourself in goodness with the utmost diligence in your actions. So each one of those 2 lines in there refer to those 2 views. And so we have to be aware of the fact that there are those 2 views. Pay attention to those. So there are still consequences for our actions, and that's important to recognize because not everybody in Tibetan Buddhism does that, particularly in Dzogchen. And this is not Tibet. Even if you are able to sustain pure view and see all actions as pure as they are, others may not, since they are still bound in samsara. This may lead to a wide variety of problems in your life and those of others. If, for example, you take the position that there are no barriers in having sex with another, and you do that, a spouse or significant other may want a divorce or break up the relationship. So there are consequences for our actions. Even if you are able to maintain a state of no attachment and no aversion under these circumstances, the ideal, your actions have resulted in a great deal of harm to others, and you have accrued negative karma. So there is still that possibility of earning, if you will, negative karma as a part of these kind of actions. We have to be careful about that. So while no rules may sound good, it is never that simple. Pick your poison carefully. In addition to the extent that you do engage in these activities, it is important to be discreet, show respect for others as well as the Dharma. So now we go on to the issues or topics of motivation, intention, and rationalization. Doing the right thing is largely a matter of motivation and intention. Excuse me. You cannot always be sure that what we intend will actually yield the best result. So you must trust your intentions and follow the guidelines. Following these is no guarantee, but they have been shown to be beneficial to the practice of millions over thousands of years. There is a risk, however, that you may use these guidelines in a way that simply rationalizes doing what you want to do, based on your ordinary attachments or aversions and your habitual tendencies. This necessitates that you are constantly aware of your choices and question your motivation and intentions before acting. As noted above, Padmasambhava said, yes, again, my view is vast as the sky, my behavior is as fine as barley flour. Never forget this. Sometimes using the ultimate view as a basis for your actions in samsara is simply a rationalization. If I use pure view as a reason to drink alcohol or have sex, then I am rationalizing. If, however, I genuinely see alcohol as nectar and illusory, then it does not matter if I drink it or drink water. I have no attachment or aversion, no preference one way or the other. Similarly with sex. If I maintain pure view during sex or follow the guidance of the Lama for a practice of sexual yoga, without any attachment or aversion, then it will not affect my karma. But if I am just using no attachment or aversion to rationalize my desire to have sex, then it can have consequences for me and for others, which of course comes back to me. Yes, there may be cases where circumstances and the view of yourself and others such that you can engage in crazy wisdom, as it's sometimes called, and cross the line. But rationalization is a very slippery slope. Beware. It is important to maintain your behavior as fine as barley flour when dealing with others, no matter how pure your view is. And finally, today, we are going to go into a little bit on skillful means. Now, we've been talking about skillful means in different ways. So now look at them in this context just a bit. Because Buddhism treats ethical principles as guidelines rather than hard and fast rules, there is another overriding principle necessary. This is skillful means. Previously, I mentioned the first 5 of the 6 perfections are sometimes referred to as skillful means. In this case, the term is applied to the context of ethical conduct. To avoid the slippery slope of rationalization, you can apply the principle of skillful means to help determine how and when to apply or make exceptions to the basic guidelines. Motivation and intention become important considerations here. You also need to ensure that you are not falling into the abyss of rationalization. But lying in order to save another's life is an example of skillful means. You won't always know for sure, so be careful. For this reason, there are lamas who will argue that we are simply too ignorant to decide what is skillful or not, until we attain liberation. On the surface, this may even be legitimate in guiding our behavior. Nevertheless, it can also lead you down the path of not doing good for the benefit of others. Another form of rationalization. Perhaps this is why His Holiness the Dalai Lama makes a very strong case for the importance of your altruistic intention, your ethical intention, in deciding upon your actions of thought, word, and deed each and every day. You do the best you can with what you do know, grounded in your altruistic intention to benefit others. This is skillful means. So, Just an ending note here. If you do err in the process of doing things, you do something that you think is good, turned out to be bad, do Vajrasattva purification. Go back to Vajrasattva and do that as a purification and practice it just as soon as you can, but no later than just one day. This may be done with the 100-syllable mantra or the shorter mantra. So it is an option. It is something that's available that we can and should do to help correct the error that we have made. So next week, we are going to move on to chapter 18, the second training on the path of great perfection, the meditation. So a little bit deeper dive in those areas. And so let me know, again, if you have any questions, and I will do my best to either reply to you or describe the question and answer in the teaching next week as a part of this. So in the meantime, abide softly and deeply with pure awareness, with loving kindness and compassion for all beings, always and always. And more than ever, pray for peace. Thank you very much.